I'm here with my friend Eric Bissell, and I'd like to ask him about a passage in Exodus that's always troubled me. It's in chapter 4, and at the end of Mosheh's experience with Yahuah at the burning bush, he has specific instructions to meet with Pharaoh and tell him to let Yahweh's people go. And then it appears that he follows through to obey those instructions, and on his way is a troubling verse where in verse 24 it says that Yahuah met him and sought to kill him. And I've asked a number of Hebrew roots and Messianic teachers about this verse, and I've never really gotten a satisfying answer. So I'm anxious to hear what Eric has to say on this.
Why don't we start by reading in verse 19, where it kind of picks up that narrative of the story. You want to read that, like 19
Sure.
through 23?
Sure. And Yahuah said unto Mosheh in Midian, Go, return into Egypt, for all the men are dead that sought your life. And Mosheh took his wife and his sons, and set them upon an ass, and he returned to the land of Egypt. And Mosheh took the rod of Elohim in his hand. And Yahuah said unto Mosheh, When you go back into Egypt, see that you do before Pharaoh all the wonders which I have put in your hand. But I will harden his heart, and he will not let the people go. And you shall say unto Pharaoh, Thus says Yahuah, Israel is my son, my firstborn. And I have said unto you, Let my son go, that he may serve me. And you have refused to let him go. Behold, I will slay your son, your firstborn.
Right before that, as you say, it was the burning bush incident where Moshe said, Who shall I say sent me? And he gives his name, Ehyeh Asher Ehyeh. And then he says Yod-Heh Vav-Heh would be his Shem of remembrance or renown, or to commemorate his name throughout the generations. But in 4 verse 10, it says, Moshe replied to Yahuah, Please, my Lord, I'm reading the Stone's Tanakh edition here, I am not a man of words. Not since yesterday, nor since the day before yesterday, nor since you first spoke to your servant, for I'm heavy of mouth and heavy of speech. You might say that's kind of cumbersome or unable to walk, stumbling, you might say. Whether that was in his own mind or he had some sort of speech impediment, there's a fabled sort of story about that. That's another matter. But he's not a man of words, he says. But then Yahuah responds to him. Verse 11, Who makes a mouth for a man, or who makes one deaf or dumb or sighted or blind? Is it not I, Yahuah? So now go, I shall be with your mouth and teach you what you should say. There's something setting up here about words and about speaking. So, as you said, it sounds like Yahuah is totally good with Moshe, no problem. He commissions him to go, and he sets him on his way. And then we come to verse 23. Do you want to read the next 3 verses there?
Starting with verse 24.
Yes.
And it came to pass on the way at the lodging place that Yahuah met him and sought to kill him. Then Zipporah took a flint and cut off the foreskin of her son and cast it at his feet. And she said, Surely a bridegroom of blood are you to me. So he let him alone. Then she said, A bridegroom of blood in regard of the circumcision.
Another way to read that is a damn bloody husband. And the reason we say damn, I'm not using some sort of profanity, but the Hebrew word for blood in Hebrew is dalet mem, or dam, dam, as in Adam, aleph dalet mem. But dam literally means red, like our shirts that we've got here.
Right.
And damim would be the plural, so you could say, is this bloods, or something about a blood between me and you? What is she actually saying? The only way it's translated is bloody. And then the word for husband is chet tav nun, which is to be related by marriage. But chet tav, with nun as a suffix, can have something to do with shattered, dismayed, terror, fear, simply the word for one. And it has something to do with being, if you look at het, tav, kaf, changing the suffix from a nun to a kaf would mean cut, decided, determined, pronounced, and articulated. So there's something about speaking words here, thus causing something to happen, or coming to some sort of, you might say, legal or lawful status on account of words. This is all about the study of words. So, as you read in English, nobody knows why Yahuah would all of a sudden call Mosheh to go back to Egypt. He picks up his family, he puts them on the donkey, and they start traveling, and then all of a sudden, for no good apparent reason, Yahweh gets some bee in his bonnet and comes out to kill him.
That's the way it reads.
Kill who? Kill Mosheh? Kill his son? Is it Yahweh or is it an angel of Yahweh? We can't tell from the way it's rendered in English. One problem is that in Hebrew, they use the letter Vav. Sometimes they've translated it as you, or they, or he, or it. It might be reference to she, and you don't know if it's talking about the subject, or the object, or this person or that person. And so the various translators have a field day with it, and they kind of spin their story how they see fit. And I'm not saying that's wrong, because that's the trouble with Hebrew, especially compared to English. English is very exact and precise, but Hebrew, it leaves it wide open, and so somebody has to try to make sense of these words. So, people do the best they can. I'm going to read you those 3 verses in a different way of addressing it, and then we can discuss that. So this is how, using the Erichtology method of looking at what each individual letter can be read to mean, what every 2 letters of a word can be read to mean, excuse me, something in my throat there. And every 3 letters, or if not every 4. Determining what's a prefix, what's a suffix, what's the root of the word. But it's also a matter of saying the way Hebrew's written, there's a word used here, and then another word over here, there's some other words in between, and then another word, and there's a theme, there's a thematic connection between these words, even though they're not back to back. And if one takes the liberty to tie these together as if it was intentional, that the author of this text, Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh himself, not just Moshe writing this or some scribe telling us what happened, has used these words in particular. Well, what I found is that if you're given one word that might have 3 or 4 meanings, and then another word with 3 or 4 meanings, and another word, someone might translate this word with this meaning and this word with this meaning, and so it tells a story and so forth, and you'll never make the connection. But by looking at the dictionary, you'll see that there's a common meaning. One of the words that they didn't use to translate in this word, and in this one, and in this one, tie it together. For example, the word derek can mean road, or the way, or the journey, or the method that you walk, but it can also mean to bend a bow. But it's also instructed or taught. So there's something about teaching somebody how to bend a bow, and then there's another word that he sought to kill him, but that word to seek also means to take aim, to aim at something. Well, if you bend a bow taking aim at something, something else has to be at the target. So it infers this first step, the second step, that infers a third step. Where's the third step? And that's the word, his death. So when it says Yahweh sought to kill him, I don't think it was necessarily meaning that. The other interesting thing is if you simply take the word spelled Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh and say, okay, in Exodus 3, he tells us that's his memorial name. But it's a word. As a comparison, if you say, well, the word Yosef, Yod-Vav-Samik-Peh, that's Joseph's name. But if you see the word spelled Yod-Vav-Samik-Peh, you won't see that it says Joseph. Sometimes it'll say he will accumulate, because that's what the name means. So if every time you see Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh, you say, oh, that's Yahweh's name, it must say something about him. What the word means is he will cause it to exist, or he will annihilate it, destroy it so that it doesn't exist.
Okay.
That's what the word means. So therefore, if every single time there's a Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh, with or without vowel points, you say, oh, that's the sacred name, what if it's not? What if that's being led astray and that's not necessarily? So if you find the sacred name with certain vowel points, perhaps it's just being used as a verb, meaning he will cause it to exist, or that it doesn't exist.
Right.
That's another person's study that we won't get into. But what I'm saying here, let's go on with the narrative. And it just so happened along the way, they stopped to lodge overnight at the inn. That's the way it reads. The exact same word for inn, where you stay overnight, is the word for dictionary or lexicon, or the place that words are harbored. Could be read like this. He caused it to be so that they stopped for the night and began musing about words. The same word for derrick or way or journey or to bend the bow is the same word for amusement or to muse or to ponder and consider about words. He just said he was not a man of words. He's now, by the use of words, told to get up and go to Egypt to confront Pharaoh, which is a very intimidating task that he was given. And he's like, I'm not a man of words. What's all this about words? So now him and Zipporah have to stop for the night at the inn, and they start thinking about words. That's another way you can read this sentence. About the way they had been guided, given instructions of conduct, customs which separate them from all other people groups, the way you might insulate something delicate, and even how their own particular generation was isolated, unique from all others, time and place, as if it were being staged. Yahuah had just spoken of Israel being his own son, so Mosheh was examining the difficult question about who is it that invites such violence to himself, putting himself in the crosshairs, the target as it were, so as to be the enemy of Yah. Suddenly they realized, picturing a bent bow with the arrow aimed directly at the death of their own son. For they, having absent-mindedly neglected carrying out their own duties, Mosheh is confronted by the fact that the present circumstances constitute the context of one who is disassociated and vulnerable to trouble. How can this possibly be averted? Now, all that I just read is the translation of verse 1. Just verse 1.
Verse 24.
Verse 24. I tried to look at every single word and look at all the different ways that it could be interpreted. Now here's verse 2. As a fire blazes up, Zipporah, early in the morning in great distress, herself having taken hold of the teaching and conceiving them as her own, not learning about a foreign, distant culture, but owning them, she takes hold of a flint rock and cuts off the foreskin of their son, whereby he became lawfully in regulation, whereas his own walk had been inadvertently compromised, he is now declared fit. Circumcision accomplished the goal of exterminating the alien nature, cutting off the Gentile condition. Stipulations demand the sign as a necessary marking. It qualifies one to be recognized as son of Yahuah. Distinguished from any other, he had commanded the regulation. So, here and now, by this cutting, it is decided, determined, and so articulated that you are mine, equal in identity, one blood, you and me. So thus, it was ordered at this most auspicious juncture that we stopped at this inn this night, just so you and I could discuss how we were taught to walk and notice that the way we were walking had a discrepancy. Now that's verse 2. Here's verse 3. And so he was encouraged, as one might tie his shoelaces. The idea here is something being loose and then you tighten it up so that you can walk right. He had been thinking that he was walking on the journey. He stopped, he noticed that something was loose, something didn't fit, something wasn't right. He looked at the words and he realized, man, I need to tighten up my walk so that I will have success. That's where Zipporah jumped in, circumcised the son, and says, now we're ready to go. He had been at the place of wondering, who exactly is he? Why me? Then at that time, it all came together. His appointment, his divine mission, trustee of the word. Zipporah had contended as one who wanted legal contract rights. She was laying claim, proclaiming that by this branding insignia, she was hereby related not only by marriage, but equally, cut of the same cloth, the same fear and honor, as you regard Aleph Tav, so do I, together as one. Now that's verse 3. It reminds me of this other verse in Genesis 20, verse 10, that Abimelech had just had this situation with Abraham, took Abraham's wife Sarah. He had a dream where trouble and ruin was coming to his own house, and he realized that Abraham had sort of misled him. And he says to Abraham, "What did you see that you would do such a thing? What did you see that you should do such a thing?" I might ask you, Fred, weren't you for generations long, a good Seventh-day Adventist going to church every single week religiously without fail and believing it 100%? You must have seen something that caused you to behave differently. What did you see that you should do such a thing as to kind of jump ship and take a whole different route to walk?
I was confronted with these words just as Mosheh and Zipporah were. And I came to a point where I had to say, am I going to hear and do this, or am I going to ignore it?
There was a lady, Cecilia, who wrote us an email the other day. Listen to what she says. She watched some of these various tapes. "The pieces missing, but held within my soul, brought forth into tangible understanding." Just for the sake of looking at the words. I think that's beautifully articulated. This is not about rebellion. This is about taking the time to stop and look at the words and realize something's wrong. To stop and ponder and say, why are we stopping here? Circumstances bring us to stop here. So we stop here, we start looking at words, and we realize something about the way we're conducting our life does not agree with these words.
Right.
And it wasn't necessarily Yahweh is meeting up with him and seeking to kill him, but what he noticed is that the circumstances which existed, that's Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh, had the arrow of destruction aimed at his own son. If Yahweh was going to kill those who were not his own son, by Moshe's son not being circumcised, put him into the category of being the guy that would be killed.
Yeah.
And he realized, according to the words, my son is standing in front of the target.
Right.
I need to do what Yahuah says,
Right.
so that as we walked according to the conduct and manner of the covenant, we're safe, we're protected, we're under
Yes.
the shadow, under the covering.
Yes.
So to be under the covenant, you are under a curse, as he says in Galatians, I believe it is, because according to the covenant, if you step outside of the instructions, you will catch the curse, you will catch the trouble from your adversaries, and they have the power and authority to overwhelm you. Like if you're out from under the umbrella, the rain has the authority to get you wet.
Yes.
Yeshua said something about our adversary goes about as a roaring lion seeking whom he may devour. It's almost like Yahuah says to the adversary, those people that are under this shelter of the covenant are safe and you can't touch them. But when they step outside of the covenant, now they're under the covering of the curse, which says, you may devour anyone you catch. It's a whole different way to read why we should come back to these words. And Zipporah jumps up with a zeal and says, I want to be part of this covenant, and I'm going to take it into my hands to accomplish and do and make sure I'm with you, Moshe. Let's do it just like he said.
What a beautiful picture.
It's a whole different thing than what we've been told.
Boy, that cleared that up nicely, Eric. I'm glad we finally got around to doing this one, because I know there's a lot of people with questions about this, and that was so beautifully put. I really appreciate you taking the time to break that down for us.
Thank you.
Shalom.
Shalom.